The movie begins with an old lady gently crocheting in her room when she begins to hear some disturbing and scary noises in the walls of the house. She gets up to call the bug exterminators. Searching their contact from a diary, the person on the intercom hears ask for her name and address, and the old lady reads it from the posters on the wall.
My name is Helga. I press Lane, South Brooklyn.
114.
Minutes later, Jack arrived in a van.
Press the little button on the intercom.
He buzzed the intercom and made his way up the stairs to the old lady's apartment.
People ever hear of an elevator?
He then noticed a smelly substance coming out from the vent door. The old lady opened the door for Jack, and he introduced himself as Exterminator. The old lady doesn't seem to remember calling him or hearing any noise in the house. And at that moment, they both heard a screeching noise.
There's a noise.
Jack slowly walked into the room, and the noises came again.
Oh, someone back there?
He gently traced the noise to a door at the end of the room. He walked in and found a blood trail on the floor. He followed the trail to the vent and he sees a dead body. He was terrified and screamed for help to the old lady as he was being pulled by the noise. Instead, the old lady went back to her seat. The noise came back to the old lady. The old lady was seen heading toward the phone and calling another exterminator. Flashback to 4 days earlier. A girl named Anna finds her way into a room from a vent. She looked around the room and picks up a doll. Then she takes a picture of it and tagged it as her next victim. Suddenly, she sees a black spider unclimbing her hand. She brought out a matchbox from inside her pocket, and she gently placed the spider inside the box. Say, hurriedly went back the same way she got in. At that moment, an elderly woman walked in. She sees a break in the window glass and raised an alarm. Anna crawled her way through the vent. She came to the old lady, which happens to be her grandmother, quietly sewing on the couch. She went further and sees a scientist making his research in the room. And just then she came across the elderly woman, taking out on her stepfather, and ordered him to fix the break in the window. Charlotte hurriedly went back to her room. She picked a transparent bottle and placed the spider gently inside the bottle.
Charlotte!
On spur of the moment, her stepfather entered. He tells Charlotte there was a break in her storeroom and asked her if she was the one responsible for the break. Charlotte denied knowing anything about the break. At that moment, his phone rang, and he went outside to answer. Charlotte looked up at her new pet and named it Sting.
We're gonna call you Sting.
Just then her mom called her, and she tells Charlotte to look after her baby brother while she was away. Later, Charlotte was busy drawing when she sees a bug on the table. She picks the bug and fed it to the spider.
You hungry?
It immediately ate it and stayed at the top of the container. Charlotte finds another bug. She gently opened the cover of the glass and dropped the bug inside. The spider was quick to feed on the bug using its web. Father was in the drawing room. When Charlotte came into the room, she sits on his laps and the two had a little chit-chat. Her mom showed up and was happy to see the both of them finally getting along. The couple came together when they talked happily over dinner. Meanwhile, the spider had built a big nest in the jar. Her stepfather was busy with the drawings when he hears a noise from Charlotte's room. He walked into the room but couldn't find Charlotte. Then he sees a picture on the table, and he noticed a glass jar. At that moment, Charlotte appeared from behind. He puts her to bed, and there he tells her how much he loves her, and then he left her. Later that night, the spider was able to open the lid of the jar and crawl his way out of the room through the air vent. The spider came down to the sitting room, where her aunt was sleeping and a parrot in a cage. The next day, the family were all going around in their different duties when suddenly they heard a scream coming from the sitting room.
Down to the minimum, up to the maximum, or pandemonium, live.
They rushed in to see the parrot was being fried up in a cage. The elderly lady was thinking it was done by some rats, and she tells her stepfather to call the exterminator.
You call Frank.
Frank arrived at the scene and was marveled. He says he doesn't know what killed the parrot, and whatever did was very small. He began tracking the killer, and his tracks led to the air duct.
Hey, Grandma, I'm gonna find out whatever killed your little feather baby. I'm gonna exterminate its ass.
Who's he?
On the other hand, Charlotte came with a bag full of bugs for Spider, when suddenly, a white ball rolled towards a glass jar. The spider seemed to be scared of the ball. She picks it and touched it, web, and at that moment it shakes terribly, making the jar almost fall off the table. She looks at the spider and discovered it has grown twice bigger. Frank was still following the tracks, and it led him to Charlotte's room. He sees the drawings on her desk. He was checking the air duct in her room when she suddenly appeared behind him. She tells him she doesn't want the spray in her room, and Sting doesn't like it. He asked if Sting was a dog or cat, and she mentioned Spider. He tells her spiders are not meant to be considered as pets, as they don't have a tendency to love like dogs and cats, and their only aim is to eat and kill. He then moves closer to look at a view of the spider, and became terrified as he sees it. Charlotte continued to feed the spider with the roaches. Later that night, while everyone was asleep, the spider crawled its way out of the jar, and through the vent. The dog was able to sense it and was barking, which alerted her mother, and she woke up. She goes to the kitchen and takes some aspirin since she was having a headache. After that, she was looking at a picture when the spider suddenly appeared and attacked her. She fell to the ground and suffered a wound which made her bleed. She also began to choke as the poison from the spider was already taking effects. Just then, her body became stiff and she fell in the bathtub, completely paralyzed. The spider then showed up and made his way through her mouth and began to eat her up from the inside. The following morning, Charlotte made her way to meet the scientist, offering him some money to buy his fish tanks, so she could use it as cage for her pet spider. She shows him the spider and tells him it was totally different from any other species, and she couldn't find a match on Google.
Want to see what she looks like?
After seeing the spider, he was taken aback and warns her that the spider could be dangerous. He then tells her to leave the spider with him so he could find a very befitting cage for it, which she agreed. Meanwhile, her stepfather and her mother were in the midst of a conversation when they heard disturbing noise coming from the air duct. He goes to check it, but he was sacred to see a creature, only to discover it was his aunt's dog. He takes the dog down to her room and opened the door. On getting inside, he was shocked to find her body already butchered from the inside. They called an ambulance to cart away the body, and a police officer was taking a statement. At that moment, he received a call from a biologist. He goes to his room, and there the biologist tells him he was keeping a very dangerous spider, which would be a threat to national health, possibly a killer. Mike couldn't believe his ears, and he shows him the spider, which terrified him a lot. Ethan then approached Charlotte while her mother was on her laptop. He tells Charlotte she could no longer keep the spider, and they were going to destroy it. This made her flare up, and she yells at Ethan, saying he could never be like her father. At that moment, she hears the truth that her father was still alive and living across the bridge. This made her burst into tears. Her mother was also angry at Ethan, saying it wasn't his responsibility to tell her. Meanwhile, the scientist had put the spider in a large cage and was feeding it with other creatures, which allowed the spider to grow bigger and eventually break out of its cage. Meanwhile, the white lady goes in search of her cat in the hallway. She sees a shadow of a spider which terrified her, but then discovered it was a plant. She hears the cat screaming in the air vent and crawled in to call out to her cat. Just then the flashlight tripped off.
Stupid flashlight.
And as she lights up a match, she sees the spider, and it pulled her into the vent. Ethan was together with his family in the room, and he lost his cool and smashed the TV screen. Maggie tells Charlotte to take the baby away while she spoke to Ethan. Charlotte lays the baby in the baby cage. While she lays on the couch with her earphones plugged in, she didn't seem to notice the spider, which was hanging on the ceiling. At that moment, the spider jumps on Ethan and also Maggie, paralyzing them to the ground. Ethan tries to reach out to Charlotte, but she seemed to be lost in the video game she was playing on her phone. She noticed the dog barking and goes toward the kitchen to get food for it, not noticing Ethan being dragged away by the spider. She sees the dog hasn't stopped barking and moved towards the direction, noticing something was wrong or in the air vent.
What the hell is going on? Sting?
She called out to Sting, which showed up at that moment, and she was able to cover the opening just in time. Terrified, she sat down in the corner. She noticed a movement behind her. She runs to the baby, but is being carried away by the spider, and she goes to the air vent, screaming to Sting to bring him back. Determined to find Sting, she crushed a ball of mint, mixing it with water and loading it into a water gun. She heads into the air vent. She was terrified when she sees the dog being parfited. Then she pressed on. Meanwhile, Ethan and his wife were being covered in web with their mouths being tied up. Charlotte made her way into Eric's apartment. She sees a cage where the spider was. She called out to him only to find him stuffed up to the roof covered in web. She goes to her grandmother. She tells her not to take off her sweater after smelling it. It had the scent of the mothballs. She then goes to the kitchen and grinds some more mothballs, mixing them with water. She sprinkles the water on the body and heads into another room to find the spider. She sees Ethan hanging from the web. She pours the water on him, which melts the web, and Ethan was free. The two then began to climb up the vent. They heard Liam's voice say baby, and as they looked up, they saw the spider, which made them drop down the vent into the garbage shard. The spider then comes after them. It was almost reaching Charlotte when Ethan takes the moth water and pours on the spider, making it run up the vent. He then carried Charlotte to a corner and was trying his best to calm her down. Just then, Frank also fell out through the vent. He was terrified and angry, asking what the creature was. Charlotte tells him it was her spider sting. He was thrown into a state of panic and runs to open the door. He realized the door was locked and he yells at Ethan to open up the door.
Where's the key? It's mothball water. It burns her webs. It hurts her.
Ethan gives him the moth water, which he used all over his body.
Let's kill this bitch.
Just then the spider appears from the window, and he was quick to shoot it with his laser gun. In the process, the fire alarm was set up and the water began to pour out. Charlotte realized the water was washing off the moth, and they were not protected anymore. It was too late. The spider covered Frank and killed him in the vent. Ethan and Charlotte found a way through the trash vent, and there they see her mom and the baby.
Mom!
Ethan uses the moth water to burn out the web, freeing them, and they all embraced each other. Just then, the spider appeared and was heading towards them.
Come get some children.
Ethan pressed a remote button to activate the trash crusher, but it wasn't working, and he realized it wasn't connected to the power source. He tries to plug it in while Charlotte uses steel to protect himself. Just then, Ethan was able to connect the switch, and there's Charlotte pressed a button, and the spider was crushed and killed. Her mother was seen trying to revive Ethan, who was electrocuted from the switch. She kept giving him CPR, and he came back to life. The family then embraced each other, unknown to them. The spider had already laid eggs in the corner, and one of them has just hatched. And that's where the movie ended. Please subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. See you guys in the next episode.